All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is them on the moon. What's up? Hello, who's ever watching? Buckle up. I got a Zin, I got my milk, and I filmed my music video this week. And it actually went great. I mean, all things considered, it was awesome. And I think for me, one of the coolest things was I didn't realize kind of how big of a production it was going to be. So, like, when I pulled up at like 6 a.m., they had like a full box truck. There's probably like 25 dudes or 25 people like involved in the shoot, and they're rigging up these lights. There's dudes up in the rafters. I'll show you some of these pictures from my photo dump. Yeah, so this is like the set. But you could see there's like freaking dudes up in there in the rafters and all these lights and equipment and everyone. This is my glam team, basically. This is April, who did my makeup. This is Jocelyn, who is my wardrobe stylist. And this is Arista, who did my custom costume and helped me out during the day. And so this is the costume she made, which I'm going to talk about that in a bit, which is freaking dope. But anyways, it was crazy. And so many people, and it was so cool to see like everyone there for my art, right? So I'm just like singing and dancing around like a retard, and like all these people are there to like help me make my thing a reality. And for me, it was such a stark contrast because I do everything by myself all the time. I'm always alone. My older brother mixes and masters my music. But other than that, I pretty much am just on my own. Everything I do, like my last two music videos, I made 99% by myself on my own. So having like this big team was so cool. And, it's like when I'm doing my takes and stuff, all the girls are like dancing and like singing along and stuff. And like people are vibing. And it was cool. It was just rewarding and fun. And I don't know if it's really vain, but it just kind of made me feel like I was someone, and I liked that. That was nice for once. So that was cool. And one of the funny things is that I told them before we shot, I was like, guys, I'm going to be sweating balls. We got to have like AC, and like, I can't be burning, and I'm going to be sweating during the shoot. So I get there and they have these big AC units in there, and like all these poor Indonesian dudes are like zipped up in jackets and like hoodies, and they're all just like the dudes that had to wait are just like sitting in the chairs like this all day. And I was like, I'm sorry, I felt like a dick, but I was still sweating anyways. But that was kind of funny, I think. But I just got the footage yesterday. I barely looked through it. I'm doing the edit, and I barely looked through it, but everything looked pretty good. I have a pretty good feeling about it. I'll really have to wait to see till I just get the footage and the 3D scenes and everything, to see fully what's up. But all in all, like, I think it was awesome. So I have a lot to talk about today. I want to talk about this chick, Arista, who made my outfit. So this girl. And she was the freaking best, dude. She came pretty far to bring the outfit. I think she lives like a couple hours away, 2 hours or something. But here's the crazy thing. I know this chick in LA. And I was talking to her randomly, and I was like, hey, I just mentioned I was in Jakarta. And she's like, yo, I have a friend who I went to school with here, or who went to school in LA that is my friend, and she lives in Jakarta now. So she got us like on a FaceTime call, and we were just, talking, and I was like, what do you do? And she's like, oh, I do costume design and theater stuff. And I was like, no way, I have a music video. Maybe you can design a costume. So it just came through, right? So I was like, I sent her this AI reference, and she just posted this on Instagram. You could see the AI reference I sent her. Can I zoom in here? And here. And then the video. I could brush my teeth, like what she did. But I could wash my sheets. So yeah, and we did all these sheets and stuff like that. But anyways, I sent her this, and she built me this. And she like, bro, she's a legend. She freaking hand sewed and like handmade the shirt, and it was so cool. Such a cool outfit. It was so comfy too. I loved wearing it. I was like, this is so freaking comfy, and it fit me great. And she just nailed it. And she was there from like 7 in the morning till 10 at night, and she helped with the whole shoot and helped me with my wardrobe throughout the day. And she was just a freaking sweetheart, and she was so awesome. And the crazy thing is too, she came here to do the fitting before the video, and she had stayed in this exact Airbnb before. And I'm just like, dude, what are the freaking odds that I have this friend and this connect, and then she ends up working on the video, and it just all worked out so well. And she had stayed here in the same Airbnb and stuff. I was just like, bro, get out of here. But the thing is that's interesting to me is she mentioned, I was like, hey, can you get there at 7? And she's like, yeah, I gotta pray in the morning though, 'cause she's Muslim, you know, she got the whole hijab and everything. And I was like, oh, okay, no problem. If 7's cool, we'll do it. And later at the end of the shoot, we were sitting around while they were kind of finishing up some like B-roll stuff, and I was talking to her, and I was like, hey, you mentioned you prayed, you know, in the morning or whatever. And I guess she prayed during the day too. I missed it. She said she's like, I thought you saw me praying in the green room or whatever. But they have to like pray multiple times a day in Islam, you know. And anyways, I was like, so what's the prayer? Like, is it like a predetermined prayer you say, or do you freestyle it, or like, what's up? And she explained to me that it's a predetermined thing at first, and then you can freestyle it after. But anyways, we ended up just getting in this kind of long conversation about faith and religion and everything. And it's cool because she was so nice, and she kind of had a very open, you know, attitude towards me asking her about Islam and everything, which I'd never really had a conversation like that with a Muslim. So I would just have a million, you know me, I'm like, I got a trillion questions. And so the thing, you know, I was just talking to her about her whole life, and without like sharing too much or getting into too much detail, she was telling me how she went to, it's really cool how she got into school in the US. She won like a contest to get the money to go, like a design contest. And then went to school in California, in Southern California, in LA. And I guess, you know, she was there for like 5 years or something, and she was Muslim when she went, and she said some people were kind of racist to her for the hijab and everything. And she was kind of struggling with it, and she kind of tried out the secular lifestyle, right? And in America. And she said that, because I was telling her how I kind of lost my faith, and she was telling me she kind of had a similar experience where she kind of walked away and tried the secular lifestyle, etc. But she said after a couple years, she was just honestly miserable and decided to literally leave America. She could have just stayed in America. She had a job, she had a whole thing, and just go back to being a Muslim and put back on the hijab and come back to Indonesia. And she said she's so much happier and better off and everything. And it's just so interesting to me because, you know, not to shit on America, but it's like you hear this thing where it's like, well, if you have a problem with America, like go back where you're from, or like whatever. And it's just interesting to listen to her experience of like this person who did go to America and got a job, and like most people dream of that, and still ended up miserable and ended up happier and better off going back to being a Muslim and in Indonesia, right? And it's just crazy, right? I'm like, wow, you don't expect that necessarily. And it just goes to show you all the different walks of life and ways you can live and things you can value and ways you can orient. And it was just a really mind-opening experience talking to her about Islam and the faith, and like how like they don't date. She doesn't date. Like they have this interesting way you get married and meet people, and was telling me about how you gotta enter the bathroom with your left foot and out with your right foot, I think, and just all these interesting kind of like quirky things about Islam. And I think Indonesian Islam is maybe a little different than like Middle Eastern Islam. Like it seems like a lot more chill here. It's not as like militant in some ways, but just a really cool eye-opening experience and conversation I had with her. And she was just such a freaking gem, just so nice, such a good vibe, really interesting. I wish we would have had more time to kind of talk about all that stuff, because I love when someone's an open book and allows me to just ask questions about their faith and more personal aspects. And so that was really cool. And I really valued that experience. And I just think it's one of those things where it's like that. It's like a small world, man. I'm like, what are the freaking odds of this connection, and like whatever. And it just panned so well. So that was really cool. I know that's a lot on that topic, but it was impactful to me. So that's why I'm sharing. Um, okay. So let's see what else we got here on our thing. Let's just get into the update now. And I have a lot more that I want to say as we get in here, but let's go, because we're going to talk about Charlie Kirk, and we're going to talk about the Bible, and we're going to talk about other things. But let's just get what I'm wondering about this week. What does quotidian mean? I heard this on a debate. She's like, the quotidian, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what is that? It basically means standard, or it's like status quo, right? So it's like general or standard or whatever. Okay. What's the civilian to combatant death ratio in the Israel-Gaza conflict? I had a short and I was basically making the point that while what Israel's doing is horrible, it's pretty much par for the course in terms of war, if you consider everything. I was just kind of exploring that point, but this person's like, yeah, it's fine. The combatant death ratio is like 1-to-1. And in my head, I was like, that's insane. Like one combatant dead for every civilian. I'm like, that's high to me. I'm like, oh my God. So I look up to see what it really is. And apparently, even based on Israel's numbers, it's freaking 4-to-1 civilians deaths. I think that's conservative. 5-to-1 or 6-to-1. So I think, so 5 civilians dead for every 1 militant dead, which is insane mode. I was like, oh my God. And it apparently is much higher than a lot of other things. So if you look at Mosul in 2017, you have a 1-to-1. Raqqa is a 1-to-1. The Vietnam War was a 3-to-1, and World War II was like a 3-to-1. So it is really high. But the thing is, if you consider the fact that in all these other conflicts, the people were allowed to leave, right? It's like Egypt won't let freaking Palestinians over, right? Because they don't want to destabilize their region, and they're afraid Israel will just fully take over Gaza, I guess, from what I was reading. And Jordan won't let people in, and so the people are trapped in there. So that's one factor that makes it higher. But still, Israel is conducting military operations similar to how everyone does. It's just if you add the thing that no one will let them out, the civilians out, and the fact that Hamas uses them as human shields and is okay with casualties. Usually, the enemy or one side tries to protect their civilians and gets them out of there and keeps them out of the fighting, but Hamas doesn't care to do that. So all that stuff combined with normal military actions, you get much higher civilian casualties. So that's kind of what I'm at with it. Not saying it's okay, not saying it's good, not condoning it at all, but that's kind of the reality of the situation, it seems like, as far as I can tell. With that, okay, another one. What are the top 10 rivers by volume? I got this a bit wrong last week. The crazy thing is it's mainly the Amazon. That's the biggest one. So if you look at percentage of global river water, the Amazon is 20% of all the river water in the world is in the frickin' Amazon. And then you have the Ganges or Ganges, and these ones are in India, these two, and they combine, basically. They come off the Himalayas and combine, and that's 4% of all the river water is in there. And then you have 3.5% of the river waters in the Congo. Orinoco, I've never heard of that one. And then Yangtze is 3%. And then all these other ones are 1%ers, basically, 2 or 1%ers. So the freaking Amazon is just the Jeff Bezos of rivers, or the Elon Musk of rivers, basically, which is crazy. So now you know. Okay, I'm going to get to this God suffering servant thing in a minute. We'll go to the Bible adventures, but compare, this other one's interesting. Compare USA and Indonesian murder rates. Okay, per 100,000 people, what would you guess is the murder rate in US versus the murder rate in Indonesia? Just take a guess. So out of 100,000 people, how many get murdered? Okay, in each country. I was pretty surprised by this. I was expecting similar. Okay. USA murder rate is 5 people per 100,000. So, and then in 2024, there was 20,000 murders, basically, in the US. Indonesian murder rate 0.3 or 0.4 people per 100,000 people. And there was not even 1,000 homicide cases in Indonesia in 2024. So that's a wicked difference. That's insane how many murders there are in the USA. Just saying. We got one more to talk about in a bit. Let's go to, we could go to the Bible Adventures here. So 2 things here. With what I'm watching this week, was Jesus God? I know I was going ham a couple weeks ago on the idea that Jesus never claimed to be God or Jesus wasn't God and the arguments for that. This dude, Alex O'Connor, had another guy on to basically argue the opposite, that Jesus was in fact God and did claim to be God and left clues that he was God and has all these arguments for it. I'm not fully done with the episode and I didn't pay that much attention during it. It's interesting because I found myself just like this dude's arguments so uncompelling. They're like the least rock solid arguments. Like he's just like, well, it kind of sounds like he might be insinuating this here and like because of these like obscure reasons. And he had some good points that I would give to him, but that were compelling. But I think, sorry about that. All in all, I was not convinced. And part of me is like, okay, do I just have an internal bias, and that's why I don't find his arguments compelling, like that I'm unaware of this bias? Because I just was so uninterested as I was watching. I'm like, dude, this guy is like grasping for straws, it seems like. But maybe he isn't, and I'm just have like a unconscious bias. But I don't think I don't really care if Jesus was God or not. I don't think. Like, I just would like to know what Jesus really said. Like, did he really claim to be God or not? Or was that like made up and interpolated by the people of the time, etc.? I don't know. Hard to say. But anyways, I just want to be balanced, so I'm sharing that on my post, and so you can watch that. It's Alex O'Connor with Brant Fitry, number 120. But in terms of Bible adventures, I'm in Jeremiah. But I did a deep research on God's suffering servant. So if you look at this, there's Isaiah chapter 52 and 53. It talks about God's suffering servant, and it sounds a lot like Jesus. So I was like, oh man, that's interesting, because there's earlier passages in Isaiah that people claim is about Jesus that I think it's pretty clearly not about Jesus. This though, I read this and I said, this sounds like Jesus. And so I did a deep research on it, because I mentioned like in my last post that maybe it's a sus translation. And one of my friends commented and was like, the Isaiah scroll is like one of the most complete Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's like super reliable, and it's like been corroborated throughout history. And turns out that's true. But what I'm hinging on is like that Isaiah scroll is in Hebrew, and that was eventually translated to Greek for the Septuagint, which like the people of Jesus' time would have been reading. And then that whole thing was translated to frickin' English, right? And maybe even other languages before English. I'm not sure the exact history, but I'm like, okay, so in that translation process, what do these, I'm reading this English version and I think this sounds like Jesus, but what was the actual Hebrew? And like, what are the discrepancies in the translation? Because translating things is a complex thing. So apparently the like scroll itself has been preserved very accurately, but there's a few key passages where there's argumentation on how to translate it. One of them is there's a point where it says the suffering servant was wounded for our transgressions. But you could also apparently translate it to because of our transgressions, right? Which is like saying, which is the difference between punishment and like atonement, right? Like, and there's a couple other things like that in the translation where it's just it's a foreign language, it's like ancient foreign language. So what did it mean? What did they actually mean? How do you accurately translate it? There's disagreement about this. And that's a pretty big difference if it's for our transgressions or because of. And I think there's other things like that in there. And one of the arguments that it's not about Jesus is that Israel is described as God's servant and talked about in that way throughout the Old Testament multiple other times. And it seems like you can make a pretty solid argument that this passage is about Israel, not Jesus, but it does sound a lot like Jesus. And also, you know, if it is true, if the Bible's true and Jesus is God and like all this stuff is true, I could see how maybe Isaiah was like getting a prophecy, right? Or writing something, and he didn't even know it was going to be about Jesus, right? He's maybe thinking in his head it's about Israel, but really God's like setting up this prophecy and he doesn't know, and Jesus is going to fulfill it later, and it's not like Isaiah knew he was talking about a future Messiah or something. Like if, you know, that's even real. So I'm not going to just totally discount it, but I did go, okay, well, it's not exactly, it's not a cut and dry fully about Jesus slam dunk to me, but it still is interesting, and it's not a nothing burger in my opinion. And then lastly on the Bible stuff, what I'll say is this is a bit much. I'm going crazy on this one this week, sorry. I got a lot on my chest. I got a lot on my mind. I am reading Jeremiah, and it's like Isaiah, and it's like a lot of the Old Testament where it's just, I've said this before, but it's just like this endless cycle of the Israelites like rebelling and coming back and rebelling and coming back and rebelling and coming back and rebelling and getting punished. And God says, come back. And they do. And then they go away and they worship other gods and they get punished and they get destroyed and they get exiled and they come back and then they mess up and they come back. And it's like just freaking exhausting, right? It's like, I'm like, oh my God, come on. How do you not, it's like, I'm like judging them because I'm like, dude, how do you not learn? Or like, how do you not, figure this out, guys? Like freaking A. Sorry. But anyways, so the thing that is interesting is as I've been reading the Bible, I've developed this kind of thing I've been thinking about in my own life, this concept where if you take the Israelites and God and the Israelites leaving God and coming back and leaving God and coming back, if you substitute the Israelites for me and you substitute God for this idea of source, or like, I don't know how to explain it, but just the thing you feel like, there's just is a feeling when I'm doing art, when I'm doing music, when I'm like on my path, there's just this feeling of rightness, right? Where I'm like, this is like, it's like this pure connection to source and like the universe. And like, I think it's this thing, the thread of God that goes through all religions, right? And like, is this spiritual aspect of being a human, and you can have these transcendent experiences. And when you're on your path and you're doing your thing, I know that's a horrible definition, but that's kind of how I conceptualize God at this point in my life. And when I look at my behavior, right, it makes sense to be oriented towards that energy or that source as much as you can, as often as you can, and really tapped in and connected to that, focusing on it and serving that, if you will, with your life. That makes sense, right? This idea of maybe the greater good or your destiny or whatever. And when I look at my own life, I see a 1-to-1 exact pattern ratio with this thing with the Israelites going away and coming back. I do the exact same thing in relation to that experience, where all the time I'm like making music, or I get in the vibe and I connect, I like tap into source, and I'm like, this is it. Like, this is the point of life. I'm on my path. This is the right thing. This is so good. It feels so right and so good. And then I just go off and freaking watch dumb YouTube videos and like focus on some dumb other shit and like get off track and like forget about that. And then I get back there eventually. I'm like, oh, this is where it's at. I'm like, why do I forget about this, or like walk away from this, or like get so distracted by other things in the world? And it's just like this ebb and flow back and forth. And it just really, that's like reading these Bible passages. That's what I get out of it. I'm like, it seems like a version of that. And that is what that stuff in the Old Testament is like getting at. Those stories. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, there's a lot more to say on that, and I think I'll make a whole freaking video on that. Honestly, I could freaking dive way into that, but that's kind of where I'm at with reading Jeremiah. So that's a Bible adventure for you. Okay, if we're gonna move on here, to my update Here, I'm gonna do not disturb this boy. Because I'm getting some noties. Okay. Anyways, sorry. In what I'm watching, I also have this Andrew Tate interview on Piers Morgan. Super interesting. I have the weird back and forth love-hate with Andrew Tate bars. But that's really interesting, and they're talking about Charlie Kirk and just the state of the West in general. And yeah, the Charlie Kirk thing, dude, it sucks, man. It's sad, it's scary. I feel just bad. I don't, man, there's so much to say about it, but I think it's got me thinking about free speech and like freedom in general and like the US and its foundation and its values. And I just think is I watched this interesting video by Muhammad Hijab, who's like this Islam guy, this Muslim guy who like he's like a Islamic apologist, I guess. I don't know what you would say, but he was talking about how free speech is like kind of an amorphous concept, and we think like the government just like gives you free speech or not, and that's what it is, just based on the laws. But he's like, really, it's partially given by the government, but it's also just given by anyone in power, whether that's corporations or whether that's interest groups or whether that's the society at large. And you don't really have free speech. And you would say in America we have free speech, but you look at this, it's like, dude, Charlie Kirk gets freaking blasted in the neck for saying his piece. And like, is that free speech? Do we have free speech if you can get shot in the neck for freaking saying what you think? You know? And it just makes you wonder about it. And it just makes you wonder about like, I don't know, like what we're aiming at in general, I guess. And where things go from here. I don't know. I don't know the answer. It's like got me thinking so much about societies and values and like what values confer a benefit for a society for how long. Um, you know. So I don't know what's gonna happen with that. It's kind of a hard one. Okay, so as far as free speech is concerned, this is really what I wanted to get at. I kind of forgot for a second, but I was watching this other interview on Piers Morgan where the there's a theme I've been hearing when people are arguing and talking about this assassination. And it's basically a version of the right saying to the left, you're calling people Nazis and fascists, and I'll have all this inflammatory language, right? And it's radicalizing these young people to do crap like this and exercise political violence, because if there was truly Nazis and truly fascists, the response probably should be violence, right? Because you have to save your country from that. And like in the past, the response has been violence. And I guess the question is less about free speech. It's more about because people say violence is never the answer. When is violence the answer? Because I think it is the answer. Sometimes it's like that's why people go to war, and most people would argue that certain wars and conflicts are justified, in which case violence is the answer. And so my question is like, I know this is like kind of sketchy and inflammatory, but it's just generally what I'm wondering is like, at what point, if you have a country or a society and your values and sovereignty and ideas or whatever are being eroded, at what point do you use force to enforce it back again? Because if you don't, and it just gets completely taken over by something else, you're done. So at a certain point, do you just let your thing die? And because I think that's a lot of the people on the right, that's kind of the mindset they're in. They're like, well, if they're gonna freaking shoot us, and you can't reason with them, if we want to keep our country and our values and our freedoms, we got to fight for it, you know? And I think that's how you get a civil war, right? And it's like, obviously we don't want that and that's not good, but I haven't heard anyone talk about that or answer that question of like, well, dude, if like for example, you can say it both ways, right? Where I think a lot of this happened with January 6th, where it's like, at what point is the rhetoric that people are spewing responsible for the outcomes, right? So if you have Trump saying XYZ and then everyone goes and storms the freaking Capitol, at what point do you hold him accountable for that? And at what point is, a team or side or someone responsible for what they say causing harmful action, right? And what are you allowed to do in response to that reasonably? I just don't know the answers to that, and I just don't hear that discussed very much, and I don't really have any intuition for like how to navigate that space. Because like in a lot of ways, it's basically the space of, it's like navigating the space of at the end of when talking stops working, right? Because usually we talk, right? And that's what Charlie Kirk's whole thing is, like, you dialogue and you debate ideas, and it's a contest of ideas, and you debate and you talk so that there's no violence. And that's how you work through things. And we need to be able to have free speech and have these conversations and talk through our differences and disagree, and that's okay, right? But at some point, depending on the disagreements and what's being said, that will inevitably turn violent, right? Depending on where you're willing to budge or not. And so it's like the edge of that, from where the talk turns to violence and that you can't have a conversation anymore. Like, what are the dynamics of that edge, right? What are the dynamics of that zone? And when is it justified to not talk anymore? When it's like, okay, we're done talking. This isn't gonna, it's like, it's like, if you imagine, like, I think this happens all the time, where if you have a conflict on the street and someone has a gun, right? And they're like, dude, someone has a bat and they're coming at him. And he's like, stop coming at me, stop coming at me. And he's like yelling at him, fuck you, I hate you, blah, 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 you're da 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 da. There comes a point where you're trying to tell him to stop. He's telling you he hates you, whatever. There's this talking, right? But then there comes a point where you got to pull the trigger, or dude's going to freaking swing on you, or he does, and then you pull the trigger, right? And there's like this place where it goes from not talking to whatever. And so I don't know where that is, and I don't know where it should be. Because I imagine, like, if you have your country and you have one side who wants it to be one way and you're one side who wants it to be the other way. I'm thinking out loud here, but if you're just having a war of ideas and you're debating and you're having ideas and you're saying this why it should be this way, and you're having political discourse the way it normally goes. If you're on a side that's losing that, which I would argue the left is, and you think that the country's going to be completely ruined and horrible if this other side wins, and you can't win the argument of ideas, what other option do you have? You either kind of roll over or you get violent, right? And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. And on this point of why people get violent, I know we don't know that much about the shooter or anything, but Theo Von had a really interesting point when I watched his video talking about it, which I want to share. And whether this is true about the shooter or not, I think it's true about a lot of people. And it just really was poignant, and I just want to share it. So let's watch this Theo Von real quick.
Yeah, I don't know anything else about the guy, but I'm guessing it was probably someone who watched so much of the same thing, and this algorithm just serves you the same. And then it's like they fucking fill you with, it's like you go to Build-A-Bear and you just put the fucking grossest stuff, and the bear's full, right? And they just keep that machine on that's just firing fucking Satan cotton into this thing, and it can't handle it anymore. And then it just does something that's just like an expression of like being soaked in whatever vitriol or violence or anger has been put into them.
Yeah, so I think he pretty much hit the nail on the head with that as far as a phenomenon that happens. Like I said, I don't know that much about the shooter. I don't know if that's what's happening to him, but I mean, dude, I mean, you see all these people cheering when Charlie got shot and that are like celebrating it, and it's so crazy, right? I'm like, if you try to get yourself in the head of that person, it's like the only way you're acting that way when like a arguably good man that has a family is killed is if you've just been filled with, like he's saying, with just build a bear of shit, like just hate and like all this like um content that enrages you. And if you're filled with that to the brim all the time and chronically online, I could see how you would celebrate a death like that. I mean, I feel like that's how those people get to those places that do that. And it's tragic. But you know, I pretty much stay off of social media and I get chronically online YouTube wise, but I logged on to X when this happened. And literally within 2 hours, I saw that girl get stabbed to death on the bus and die, which was disturbing. I saw Charlie Kirk get shot in the neck and die. And then I saw this other video of this dude in Texas who beheaded this guy. And you don't see that, but you just see this security camera from the parking lot, and you see this dude's head roll out into the parking lot, and then this guy go out and pick it up, and he's like walking around the parking lot with it, like uncensored. Like I see that within 2 hours. And I just go, fuck. And it's like you can imagine being online all the time and seeing crap like that, and depending on why someone did that or who did it and what side you're looking at, what your algorithm's feeding you, I can just see how all these people are getting deranged. Like it makes sense. And it's not good. And I don't plan on spending a ton of time in America. Coming back for the holidays, but I'm gonna dip out after that, and I don't see good things in the future of America, unfortunately. Because even if you have free speech laws, if you know you go out and you get freaking capped, how much free speech do you really have? I don't know. A lot more to process on that, but that's where I'm at now. I would encourage people to stay off of the internet for a while, if you can. Let's just move on. Here we go. I don't mean move on from the death. I mean move on in my update. What I'm listening to, Hardcore History. So, dude, Hardcore History by Dan Carlin is so fire, dude. And I listened to the first 2 episodes of his Alexander the Great one, and it's just riveting. He does such a good job. He does such good research. It's just feels like the most ultimate brain food when I'm listening. I just love it. And I love to understand the world. I love to understand history. It's just, I can't even, it's so good. And you've heard, you hear a million people. Everyone who I've ever heard talk to Dan Carlin on a podcast is like, you're the GOAT, like, of podcasting for this series. And he just goes so deep. They're like I'm listening to Supernova in the East right now, which is about Japan in World War II. But he gives you so much. There's like 5 episodes that are like 4 hours each. And he just goes into so much detail about the culture and the history and what happened before the war and how the people were and all the different things. And I just feel like I'm learning so much. It's infinitely interesting. It feels so valuable. He does such a good job. It's just, I would recommend it. It's so amazing. And his old episodes are all, you have to buy them on his website. But if you have $8, his King of Kings series about like ancient Assyria and King Cyrus and all this. Oh, dude. So good. Just so freaking good. So cool. Okay. Anyways, photo dump. We already looked at this. This is my outfit. One of them. Studio. This is my team. This is me with some of the makeup I did for one of the looks. And I think that's everything. So yeah. Dio sheets, music. Okay. Last thing I'll say is I was talking to this chick on Tinder. And usually when I'm talking to someone on there, I'm like, what are you looking for? What are you doing? And she's like, oh, I don't know, whatever. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, what are you looking for? And I'm like, I'm pretty open-minded too, but I also am getting to the age where I'm wanting to find a wife and have some kids and stuff. So I'm kind of looking for that. But she was saying, yeah, I kind of want kids too, but I don't want to bring kids into this world, and because it's so bad. And I think this is a very common sentiment. I used to feel like this, and I hear this all the time. And here's the funny thing. Um, it's reasonable. Like I can understand it. Like I said, I used to feel like that. Um, but I think part of the reason the world is bad is because good people aren't having kids. Not enough good people are having kids. The other thing is that, you know, you can make a solid argument that things are better than they've ever been. The world is better than it's ever been. And just because of TikTok and being online, like I said, when I went on X and I'm just seeing people get murdered, it's easy to imagine how can I bring a kid into this world, right? Um, but like when I listen to these hardcore history podcasts, and the more you learn about history and the world, the more you realize that it's pretty much the best time ever to live. Like if you were going to have kids at any point in history, now is the best time you could bring kids into the world, basically. And people, I just think, are generally not that educated about history. They don't know that much about history and how absolutely horrible it was for so long, and how just life was just misery. No medicine, just so like no law, no for everyone's starving. It's just like absolute misery for most of human existence, and we're living in this prosperous, amazing time while there's still an insane amount of horrible things happening. Don't get me wrong. It's just like I was listening to that Alexander the Great pod, and they talk about kind of his first like military campaign when he was taking over Thebes, and they just, dude, they ransack it, dude, and they just, everyone in the city gets basically raped and killed. The whole city, just free for all. And I don't know how many people was in there, but I'm pretty sure they did that a lot of the places they went. And that's just kind of, this is kind of how the world was. It was just places getting pillaged and burnt to the ground, and the worst atrocities happen at nauseum all the time in a continual cycle. And I think it's easy to lose sight of how good things are in general. I know for a lot of people they're not good. I'm not saying there aren't horrible things happening all the time. It's a lot of horrible things, but it used to be basically only horrible things, I think. And now there's a lot of good and a lot of prosperity and a lot of opportunity, and it's easy to lose sight of that. And I think we need to have kids. People need to have freaking kids, and good people need to have kids. And if you're the kind of person that's doesn't want to bring a kid into the world because the world is bad, you're the kind of person that needs to have a kid, right? It's like you know what I'm saying? So it's like, freaking have some babies. It's interesting watching that Andrew Tate thing where that Andrew Tate interview on my update. If you click the link in the description, you can go find it. But he has this really interesting take on women and women's rights. It's pretty rough, but he talks about how he's like, he has over 10 kids by multiple women, and he's talking about, his point is that the point he makes is that white people are getting snuffed out, basically. And our like white culture or whatever is like getting roasted. Which you could argue, we did a lot of colonizing and stuff, so it's like maybe we deserve it. I don't know, but he's like, you got to stand up for yourself, for your culture, and everything's gonna get erased. And he was making the point that he has like 10 plus kids or whatever, and he has kids with a black woman, he has kids with a Chinese woman, he has kids with Turkish women, he has kids with white women, and he's like, all of my kids will have somewhere to go where they belong in a culture and a race of people. And he's like, the ones that I worry about are my white girls. And at least in the future, not like they don't now. But that's the point he was making. I'm not saying, I don't know how accurate that is, to be honest. But you look at some of the mass immigration that's happening, and you can see how, it's not like cultures haven't ever gotten erased. And so I don't know how pressing of an issue that really is. I'm not going to pretend to know. It's interesting to think about. You do see these massive protests in the UK, like immigration protests, and I think it's fair to say we have an immigration issue in the United States for sure. I don't know if white people are being snuffed out. I don't necessarily know if I buy that. It's not impossible though. But Yeah, I don't know. That's rough, man. Everything he says and all his takes are just so fraught with controversy. And I hate to say it, but he's so well spoken, and a lot of things he says do make a lot of sense. And they're just, I'm like, damn. I constantly listen to him say shit, and I'm like, that is like so politically incorrect, but also rings true in a way. A lot of the things he says, some don't. Some I'm like, okay, I think you're kind of missing the picture there, buddy. But I don't know. I like to keep an open mind with it, and I think he should be able to say what he wants. Um, I like free speech for the most part. There's a lot to say on that. I don't know. I know that's a lot. Sorry, that's a freaking tornado. We just did 45 minutes. But anyways, if you watch that whole thing, you're a legend. I kind of doubt anyone's going to watch the whole thing, but I just had so much I needed to get off my chest, and I decided to just freaking run it. So that's this week's video. If you want to subscribe to my updates like this, I do them each week, and I put photo dumps and what I'm wondering about and what I'm watching, and just a good way to stay up to date with me since I'm not on social media. And you can book a free call with me if you want to discuss any of these topics if you have strong opinions. And you can also just reply to the emails. If you sign up, it's free, and you just get these in your inbox each week. And that's what it is. Super easy and whatever. So I'm headed back to Bangkok tomorrow. So next time you see me, I'll be in Thailand again. And it's been a fun time in Jakarta, and I'm glad the music video went well. Anyways, thanks for watching, and we'll see you later. Peace.